Welcome back to Kitco Mining's Digging Deep with me, Paul Harris, in which we take a closer look at some of the most interesting news items in the mining space this week. Joining me today is Christopher Ecclestone, Principal and Mining Strategist at Hallgarten Company, one of the few industry participants who give an unsanitized expression of their thoughts on the sector through thought pieces entitled The Drama Queens of the Battery Metals and comments such as we had to laugh when we saw a company pumping US congressmen to get boron added to the critical metals list. Christopher, welcome back to Kitco.
Thank you very much.
Now, please note, Digging Deep is not investment advice, and the opinions expressed here today are our own and not Kitco's. Christopher, let's start with that comment I made. What made you laugh about boron?
Well, you know, the company boron is scarcely the word on everyone's lips. Let's put it that way. And you know, that comment that I made was part of a larger thesis, which is that the whole criticality issue, which has become very sexy in recent years, is being actually debased and devalued by every man and his dog in the promotorial space trying to get their metal, no matter how uncritical it might be, onto the critical metals list. And particularly in the case of boron, where 70% of the global production, or more than 70%, like 90%, in fact, comes from the US and Turkey, both members of NATO. To describe it as critical is a real stretch. And then to mobilize a collection of California congressmen to try and get it added to the list is just sort of like smacks of desperation. They're trying to get themselves added to a list purely and simply so that they can get their hoofs in the trough of Department of Defense funding. And frankly, with that much of boron being actually under Western control, it should be the Chinese who are worried about boron rather than the US congressman.
So it should be on China's critical list.
Oh, absolutely. I'm actually writing something now about what an imaginary Chinese criticality list might look like. So sort of like standing on the other side of the fence, looking over and saying, well, what are our problems in Beijing? What do we need? And what does the West have that they're not giving us? And boron would be very high on that list.
I imagine Taylor Swift concerts as well.
Oh, if they want them, they can have them.
Okay, well, that sounds like it will be a fascinating piece as and when that comes out. But let's turn to what I think is the only true critical metal. I've been saying this for a long time, and some more important people than me were saying that this week, and that is copper. This week I was at CRU World Copper Conference in Santiago. As I say, I think copper is the critical metal. You can't do anything without that. Chris, are you a copper bug?
I know. In a word, no. You know, we haven't got no supply crisis in copper yet. Copper is very recyclable, as any thief of copper wire would tell you. Copper pipes. We're not at a crisis point yet. You know, part of the problem with copper has been that so much of the copper that has been mined in the past has gone into infrastructure and is not coming back out again. So while it's recyclable, if it's put into the walls of your house as cabling, it may not be coming out of those walls for 50 years, 100 years, 150 years, until your house is knocked down or renovated. And then, and only then, would it come out of the wall and, you know, go back on the scrap heap for a bit of recycling. So copper has a very, very long lead time on recycling, unlike, say, lead-acid batteries, which, you know, every few years they're recycled. Yeah, it's like a perfect recycling industry in lead-acid batteries. But in copper, it's a very long lead time. So all the copper that the world's consuming, only a very small part of it is actually being disgorged again in any given year to come back into the process. So all the extra demand for copper has to be met by mines. And the thing I would agree with is that copper grades have really sort of gone to hell over the last 20 years. And so we end up with these grades now that are mere fractions of a percent, whereas once upon a time, no one sort of got out of bed for a copper mine that was under like 2% copper. But that was, of course, when the copper price was super low. The copper price, I think, was in like 1998, was under $1 a pound. It was almost a giveaway. And that long period of underinvestment, and also a long period of sort of like dependence upon cheap Chilean copper in massive amounts from massive mines, lulled the world into thinking that copper would always be there. Now, copper is out there. There are lots of old copper mines that shut for various reasons. I've been to them. You wander around and you see all this oxidized copper lying around its surface, and you think, well, who's telling me that there's no copper available? The copper industry's got itself, much like the gold industry, into a super bind that it's obsessed with big mines, big to giant mines, when the reality should be that all sort of small copper deposits should be tapped as well as small gold deposits are tapped by artisanals in developing countries. That would go some of the way towards dealing with the problem. But if you're only going to be out there hunting for elephants and there are no elephants left, you're going to come back with empty-handed.
That's an interesting point of view, that maybe companies are looking for the wrong type of deposit. The copper price was continued to move up this week to $3.40 towards $4, getting up towards $10,000 a ton again. Goldman Sachs at the conference said the price will likely rise to $12,000 a ton this year, and then go on upwards to $15,000 a ton. Despite that, there does seem to be little appetite to build new projects. And by the new projects, we're talking of the elephant scale projects that you were referring to, Christopher. Why do you see such reluctance to build new projects? What are the sort of risks that are stopping companies from doing that at the moment?
Well, look, I look at the copper space, and I went last year to several of the biggest new copper discoveries in the world in San Juan province in Argentina. These properties are enormous. They have very large resources already. And you go and speak to the people that are running these, plus also a bunch that I know of in Peru, and they'll say, oh, well, but we're drilling more. We're looking for more. We're looking for porphyries at depth. And then you say, you've got a porphyry. No, we're looking for more porphyries at depth. And I mean, how many porphyries do you need before you finally get out of the shovel or bring in a grader and actually start building the mine? And there are very large identified resources of copper out there already. And these people are looking for bigger than big. And why are they looking for bigger than big? Because they don't want to develop themselves. They want that one of the top 5, these are medium-sized copper explorers I'm talking about here, but they're actually sort of like developers. Except that they're not developing anything. They're developing the story rather than developing the mine. They're waiting for a Freeport or a Hud Bay or an Antofagasta or a Rio Tinto or somebody to come and buy them and put them out of their misery. Put them out of the fact that they're not wanting to develop the mines themselves. No one has actually asked themselves, how did Antofagasta actually become Antofagasta? How did Freeport become Freeport? They became that by developing copper mines. And these, medium-sized companies, some of which have hundreds and hundreds of millions of dollars of market cap, will just not pull the trigger on developing the thing themselves And so, oh, we'll leave that for someone else. So they're waiting for the someone else to come, but there's someone else, if we're talking about the likes of RTZ, they want something super, super big. All your Tolroy type things. And so pretty large copper deposits have been identified, drilled, measured and indicated, and they're just sitting there waiting to happen. And yet we've got these people who control them turning around and saying that it needs to be bigger. They need to do more drilling. And they'll say something like, well, you ask how much cash they've got, and they'll say, I've got 5 million in the bank. So how much is your drilling campaign next year? Oh, we will want to spend 30. So that means that they've got to go out and raise another 25 million. And of course, when they raise the 25 million, this stock gets clocked on the head because investors don't really want that type of dilution. And so they don't seem to get it that, in fact, developing the mine and moving to a higher level would actually benefit not only the global copper supply, but their own stock price. There are properties out there that are already in the massive category, like Taka Taka in the Argentine province of Salta, which is owned by First Quantum. They've just been sitting there for 10 years. Nothing's happened with them. There's a whole bunch of properties in Peru that are in a similar situation. The holders of these companies are just spinning their wheels, waiting for Mr. Big to arrive. And Mr. Big is, sitting on his hands. He's got other issues elsewhere, got other mines to deal with, and wants to see $6 copper before they get out of bed. So, it's a big sort of standoff between these developers in the middle and these large companies at the top who, never the twain shall meet. And until they meet, until they all get real, we're not going to be dealing with this supposed shortage. And I just don't believe it's a shortage. It's very similar in the nickel space.
I've got a very good data point for you, Chris, that I picked up on this week. And in terms of going big, this is a really good one. So according to GEM Mining Consulting, the cost to find a ton of copper over the last 20 years has increased more than 1,000%, from about $10 a ton to $120 a ton.
Yeah,
that's a pretty big jump there. Now, again,
but back in the old days, of course, you found a copper deposit, you drilled it for 2 or 3 years until it got to a certain stage, and then you started developing. You want to spend 10, 15 years drilling it before you even start asking for permits and moving ahead. Obviously, it's going to cost a lot more because you're drilling in, your initial work was done, back at the dawn of time when inflation was a different price, the cost per meter of drilling was a different price and things like that. But if you're just continually drilling, obviously you're building into this resource a very big finding cost that ultimately makes your whole proposition uneconomic if you're expecting that the buyer's going to pick it up. And what really ends up happening, and it's not just in copper, but it's also in gold, is that the company who finds it will end up running into some sort of economic difficulty, have to disgorge the property, maybe at a bankruptcy auction, and someone else will pick it up for a fraction of that cost. And so the finding cost will not be that high for the bottom fishing major that picks up the pieces of a broken mid-tier developer that has come to grief on the reef of their own egos.
Well, Chris, you talk about some interesting things about the funding of exploration, and part of that is perhaps companies are looking for the wrong kind of projects for their size and scale. But also, is there perhaps an aspect that the Lundin companies have sucked in all the equity capital that's available for copper exploration, and the smaller companies, the non-Lundin companies, are therefore finding it very hard going?
Well, that's because they get the money easily at Lundin because they're real. When they raise the money, they do something with it, And then out at the other end of the sausage machine comes some copper billets. The explorers raised the money, and out at the other end of their sausage machine comes a press release on a piece of paper or on your computer screen even. It's not very tangible. Lundin is very real. It delivers. And maybe that's a lesson for juniors. The thing about compare, mining is no different to any other economic activity. If you're a small retailer, you don't open a department store the size of Macy's. And we have lots of junior resource companies out there that think that they're building Macy's. And in fact, no, they're going to go bust a long time before they've built the Macy's. They are a corner store selling drinks and cigarettes and sweets. They're not Macy's. They're thinking that they are. And they're thinking, moreover, that someone's going to pay them a valuation of that size. And it's not happening. And then they start moaning about, the state of the markets. And there's no financing out there because no one wants to fund their extra 30 million of drilling, which is going to lead to an extra 30 million of drilling the year after and 50 million worth of drilling. And it just goes on and on, building into this cost that is never recuperable. Ultimately, if you overinvest in any asset, whether it's rebuilding your kitchen or your garage or whatever, adding it onto your house and it doesn't add adequate value to the house, then you've actually lost it. And too much exploration can be a waste of money.
Absolutely. I want to change track now. M&A has been seems to have been gathering pace in recent weeks, and we had another sort of transaction announced this week, and that was McEwen Mining to acquire Timberline Resources to augment its portfolio of development and exploration projects, gold projects in Nevada, where it has its Gold Bar mine. 10.2 cents per Timberline share, a 132% premium, transaction value of $18.8 million US dollars. What are your thoughts on this current wave of M&A we're seeing, particularly in the gold space? It seems the gold price getting up to $2,300, touched $2,400 overnight. It really seems to be perhaps some excitement coming back into the sector.
Well, the excitement in the sector is empowering producers because, of course, the producers, as the gold price goes up, it feeds straight through to their top line and then through to their bottom line and then through to their bank account and hopefully their stock price. Whereas these junior explorers, it's sort of like pie in the sky. I mean, if you've got years of drilling and then you've got the years of permitting and then you've got the years of building, who knows what the gold price will be like by the time the end product, an ingot of doré, comes out of the far end of this whole process. So obviously companies like McEwen are empowered, but then again, $18 million transaction, Mr. McEwen, you can do a lot better than that.
Okay. Some more studies out this week, and I want to pick up on one resource that was announced, and that was Aya Gold and Silver, who announced the third resource at its Boumediene project in Morocco. 23.6 million tons, grading 85 grams per ton silver, 2.62 grams per ton gold, some zinc in there, some lead in there. All in contained resource of about 64.7 million ounces of gold and all the rest. I think it's fair to say, Chris, that you're not a big fan of this company. Earlier this month, you published a report stating that it's, and I quote, massively overhyped and overpriced, and it's on your shortlist. Discuss.
Yep, it is massively overpriced and overhyped. It's not delivering on the earnings front. It's running behind on the mine build. It's going to be producing a lot less in fiscal year 24 than the projections had been put out there. And what's more, there are lots of cheaper, bigger, but not in market cap, silver companies out there, for instance, Hochschild. And I just cannot see why. Well, I can see why. It's been overhyped. And at a certain point, of course, if you can get US investors, particularly US, what they call institutional, we don't know who they are, but they're institutions in the US, pile into this thing, it produces a certain large market cap that then makes it investable for other people. And then you see this like firestorm sucking in other big investors who say, oh, the same collection of assets, by the way, were in my gold and silver when I covered it and liked it more than 10 years ago. So what causes you now to love it that you didn't love it 10 years ago when it was 1/100th of the market cap? Now it's got the same assets and it's worth 100 times more. I think methinks it's overdone and overwrought, and it has a name at the top of it that is sort of a household name in some households, and they like that. So it's got I don't know about much sex appeal, but it's certainly sucking them in, and we shall see whether it spits them out.
Okay. One jurisdiction that does seem to have some sex appeal at the moment, Chris, is Guyana, and we've seen a lot of news coming out of Guyana in recent weeks. Omai Mines did a resource update. G2 Goldfields also did one as well. People are expecting the merger eventually at some point between G2 Goldfields and Reunion Gold. And of course, recently Mako Mining announced it's going to buy Gold Source Mines to get its Guyana property. A lot going on there. What's your take on Guyana and its potential?
Well, first thing about Guyana, when one moves away from the mining news, is actually that Venezuela was on the verge of invading it a few weeks ago. So we won't dwell too much on that, but it's obviously something in the background or maybe in the foreground going forward. And I certainly don't think that if it took place would be too good for any valuation, M&A or not. Guyana is obviously the Guyana Shield, which is actually just, in the views of many, the extension of the Birimian greenstone belt in West Africa from the days when the two continents, Africa and South America, were connected together. So it's no surprise that it's a really sexy zone. Thinking about it, though, if it's that great, and Colombia's fantastic for gold, then Venezuela obviously is the missing piece in this little game there. And if Venezuela should ever open up, Venezuela would be the new Guyana, but on steroids. But for the moment, it's good. Anyone who's sort of like sticks with the Guyana story, good luck to them.
Okay, Chris. Well, let's finish off with a couple of drilling hits. A couple that sort of caught my eye this past week. You mentioned silver companies. Fortuna Silver Mines had a big hit on the SA vein at its San Jose mine in Mexico. 1,036 grams per ton silver equivalent over an estimated true width of 8.1 meters. And also in the Guyana Shield, Founders Metal, 30 meters at 11 grams per ton of gold at Froyo. What do you make of those sort of companies? Anything interesting there?
Well, Fortuna I've known since the first decade of this century, when it had a little mine in the south of Mexico and no one was particularly interested in. That is an excellent example of a company that is stuck to its knitting, has built organically, got into production, used the money from that production to build and build and build and build and become almost at the verge of being a major. And it's sallied forth from Latin America as well, because it's a very Latin company in its management, etc., and is now doing things on a global scale. So hats off to Fortuna for sticking to it and being real. The project in Guyana, great results as well. That's the type of thing one needs to see. I mean, people out there don't seem to realize some of these companies that one hears from, dare I say, in Canada, who say, oh, we've got 0.8 of a gram over a meter, and then you're getting 11 grams over that meterage. What was it? How many meters?
13,
30
11 grams at
meters.
13 meters. Yeah.
I mean, how can you actually have the gumption to try and persuade people that a deposit where it comes up with zero 0.8 of a gram is actually something that one should get excited about? So those type of developments in Guyana just put into the shade really quite mediocre results elsewhere. And I think that's the key thing. We need to be comparing all these assets across the global level, with a modicum of political risk added to them, not that Canada's without political risk, but and just say, look, okay, if it's below 1 gram per ton, it has to be really enormous. And if it's really enormous, then you get other problems like enormous capex, you get enormous tailings facilities, enormous problems, and probably never gets built, like many of the projects in the Golden Triangle of BC. I mean, really, high grade, is a scene stealer in the gold space, and so it should be.
Chris, interesting what you're saying about Canada. Obviously, Canada or exploration companies in Canada, there's various flow-through funding mechanisms, charity flow-through, etc., that they can tap into. Does that distort the flow of funds?
Totally. The whole that whole thing needs to be thrown out, and there needs to be reform of the Canadian system, because we see in Canada, that while people will say to me, okay, well, our flow through system is really great, you also get this tax loss selling season each year that steals all the benefits that you might have got from any sort of flow through financing, and the companies find their stock prices are murdered in the last few weeks of the year and during this tax year, during this tax loss selling season. And, they really need to get their act together in Canada. And what's more, they need to have a pension reform like they did in Australia with the creation of the super funds that creates a large trapped domestic funding pool for the mining industry that's more than just Sprott, and more Sprott, which it seems to be. You say, oh, have you got a big investor on board? And they say, yes, Sprott. So who else? Sprott. Okay. Where's the rest of the Canadian institutional market? It doesn't exist. And that's a bit tragic.
Absolutely. We obviously covered that. Pierre Lassonde and Frank Juster's call for that kind of thing a few weeks ago. Chris, it's been great to have you on. Thank you very much. We'll get you back on in a few weeks' time.
Thank you very much.
And this is Paul Harris, digging deep for Kitco Mining. And if you like what you see, don't forget to subscribe.